What happens when a 12-year-old black girl from the wrong side of town walks into a classroom where intelligence is treated like a family heirloom? When they mock her for loving Shakespeare, she answers with a monologue that leaves the entire school speechless. If anybody tries to tell you the first day of school can't start a war, they've never been a black girl walking into a white, uptight school where the hallways reek of money and manufactured smiles. Keisha Maxwell, 12 years old, not even tall enough to reach the top locker without a hop, but with a soul heavy like gospel on Sunday morning and a heart built to carry whole neighborhoods, stood at the threshold of a classroom like a woman bringing her name into a room where someone had already tried to erase it. In her hand, clutched like armor, was a worn-out copy of Othello, faded edges, cracked spine, the kind of book that's lived 100 lives before her. Shakespeare. Yes, that's Shakespeare. Not because someone assigned it, not because some well-meaning librarian shoved it at her, because Keisha loved words. Real ones. Words soaked in pain, betrayal, and battle. The kind of words you understand only when life makes you grow up before your time. This wasn't just a classroom. This was the advanced literature class at Clarksfield High. And don't let that chalkboard and plastic globe fool you. This place was a fortress, built white, stayed white, decorated with last names, legacy seats, and the polite racism of inherited superiority. The kids sitting there weren't smarter, just more protected. Sons and daughters of folks who never missed a fundraiser, who believed intellect was something passed down like china sets and country clubs. And then in walked Keisha, South Side born, raised on school buses that wheezed like old men. She didn't roll in with a glittery backpack or name-brand shoes. What she brought with her couldn't be bought. Grit, fire, and a notebook full of thoughts that could put a college essay to shame. Behind the desk stood Mr. Rainan, early 40s, skin like flour, voice like cold soup, the kind of man who smiles without warmth, a smile that makes you check if your wallet's still in your pocket. When he looked up and saw her, his eyebrows did a slow rise, like the system itself had just walked in and realized it let a mistake slip through security. Uh, Miss, he said, squinting like her presence made his eyes itch. Are you sure you're in the right place? This is literature, not finger painting. Keisha nodded once, firm. Her shoulders didn't flinch. Yes, sir. I was transferred, officially, with signatures and everything. She didn't bother explaining her placement essay, the one where she took Macbeth apart line by line and rebuilt it like it was her own diary. That had been ignored. Of course it was, until Ms. Brooks stepped in, the one black teacher in the whole damn building. She saw past Keisha's skin and into her words, fought for her. That's how she ended up here, even if the room clearly didn't want her. Mr. Rainan gave her a smile that felt like a knife made of jello. He scanned the room, caught the eye of Jessica, school board Barbie, and Chad, grandson of a former mayor. They were already giggling. Because here's the truth. When a black girl shows up in a space they didn't expect her, especially one who can quote Othello better than they can recite the alphabet, she's not a student. She's a punchline. You even know how to read? Mr. Rainan smirked, eyeing the book in her hand like it was a prop. Well, having a book is a good first step. And just like that, the room shifted. That kind of moment? That's not just shade. That's legacy speaking. That's decades of lowered expectations and whitewashed curriculums turning their heads and laughing behind palms. Keisha didn't flinch. She walked straight to the back corner of the room, the seat furthest from the door, closest to the shadows, not because she was afraid. Oh no, because from there, she could see everything. The field, the players, the lies. The bell rang, class started. But the energy in that room? Toxic, thick, like trying to breathe through syrup. Renan strutted around the room, waving Hamlet like a flag he inherited, droning on about tragedy like he was reading tax law out loud. It was clear he loved the sound of his own voice more than the meaning of any line in that book. Then came the moment. We're looking at Desdemona's monologue today, he said, turning to the board. Who wants to give it a try? Jessica? Owen? Silence. Of course. None of those kids wanted to stumble through Shakespeare's rhythm. Too many syllables. Too little Snapchat. So then he looked straight at Keisha. Well, since you're such a fan of the classics, Keisha stood, not rushed, not shaken. Her fingers clutched the book. They trembled, yes, not from fear, from rage, from the weight of 100 unsaid things pressed against her chest. She opened her mouth, and then she gave them Shakespeare. My noble father, I do perceive here a divided duty. To you I am bound for life and education. My life and education both do learn me how to respect you. The classroom froze. This wasn't a recitation. This wasn't mimicry. This was soul-meeting syllable. Every word pulsed through the air, bounced off those pristine walls, and cracked open something deeper. The kind of reading you don't learn in class. The kind that grows in you when you've sat quietly in a library while your classmates laughed at recess. The kind that comes from knowing what it means to live outside the script. Mr. Rainin didn't interrupt. He couldn't, because for a moment, he wasn't the smartest person in the room, and it scared him. When she finished, she looked up, met his eyes, didn't blink. And then she added slowly, deliberately, I do speak not to offend you, but to speak what is true. You could have heard a pencil drop. Even Chad stopped chewing his gum like a cow. Jessica stared at her perfectly painted nails like they held the answer to this humiliation. Rainin turned away, said nothing, walked to the board with that silence that's louder than shouting. But Keisha knew better. That wasn't a win. That was the first shot fired. Because at lunch, as she walked to her locker, someone stuck out a foot. She tripped, nearly fell. Laughter echoed behind her. So smart, huh? Someone sneered. Go back to the class you belong in. That's Clarksfield High for you, where skin color still speaks louder than Shakespeare, where foolishness is passed down like family recipes and bias is part of the dress code. But Keisha, she went home that night, sat at her little desk, opened her battered copy of King Lear, and kept reading. Because knowledge is a weapon, and if they were afraid of what she knew now, they better pray she never stopped learning. What came next changed everything. You don't want to miss how this story unfolds. The next morning, Keisha didn't wake up a child. She woke up aged, like someone who'd gone to sleep under a warm blanket and woke up wearing steel. Not in her body, but in her eyes, in the way she sat up, in the silence that hung over her cereal like fog. Yesterday had smoothed the softness out of her, pressed it flat like a dress shirt for a funeral. When you read Shakespeare better than your teacher and all he sees is your skin, that does something to a soul. That tells you this place wasn't just unwelcoming, it was built to spit you out. The hallway at school smelled like cheap deodorant and self-importance. Clarksfield High had a way of pretending it was inclusive while handing you 1,000 little signs that said, you don't belong here. Keisha walked back into room 213. Same cracked whiteboard, same third-row heater that never worked. Same group of students looking at her like she snuck into a club she didn't have the password for. She walked to her seat, back of the class, corner by the window. Her desk was still there, but something in the air had shifted. That unspoken silence. The kind you get when people think you stole something just because you're carrying it with confidence. And then there was Mr. Rainin, colder than usual. He didn't greet her, didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge she existed. As if he ignored the little black girl long enough, she'd vanish. But Keisha, she was like ink spilled on a white tablecloth. Ignoring her didn't make her disappear. It just made the stain deeper. He cleared his throat, holding a copy of Romeo and Juliet like it was a holy book, and he was its gatekeeper. Today, he said, dry as burnt toast, we're looking at the theme of love and death. Not the balcony scene, of course, he smirked. We'll go a little deeper. He scanned the room. Who wants to read Juliet's monologue? Keisha's hand shot up without hesitation. He blinked. Again? He asked, trying to smile, but landing somewhere between annoyance and disbelief. Maybe let someone else have a turn? Dead silence. Nobody else volunteered. Nobody moved. Even Jessica, the unofficial princess of the class, suddenly found her cuticles very interesting. Well, Raynon sighed dramatically, if everyone's feeling shy, go ahead, Keisha. Let's see what you've got. And she stood, not to perform, to tell the truth. Her voice didn't tremble. It cut. There was grief in it. Not drama, not show. The kind of grief that came from losing her father in a car crash, from being forced out of the school she'd loved, from walking into this one only to be mocked before she even spoke. Every word hit like a bell in a church no one wanted to pray in. And when she was done, silence. Stone silence. Then came the poison. Hmm, Raynon muttered, as if forced to acknowledge she existed. A little theatrical. Perhaps that's how it's done in your culture? The air snapped. It took 1 second. 1 second for the air to go dense, for the weight of every generational insult, every coded dismissal, every smirk at the sound of a black name, to fall like bricks. Keisha didn't blink. I'm sorry, she said, voice like cold steel. What culture would that be, sir? His pen stopped scratching. He looked up, saw the eyes. Not just her, but others too. Let's not make a scene, he muttered, turning back to the board. Too late, sir. The scene made itself. After class, a quiet voice caught up with her in the hallway. It was Tommy, pale, quiet, glasses too big for his face. He went too far, he said, shifting awkwardly. He didn't go far, Keisha answered. He just went honest. Tommy nodded slowly, unsure what to say next. She didn't expect him to. Some truths aren't meant to be shared, just understood. They turned the corner, and there she was, Jessica, and her entourage of sidekicks, walking like backup dancers who didn't know the routine. Well, 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 Jessica sang. If it isn't our Shakespeare queen. Her voice was sugar-laced with venom. What's it like? She asked, stepping closer. Being the only black girl who thinks she's smarter than the rest of us? Keisha didn't flinch. She met her gaze head-on. What's it like? Keisha said, her voice low. Being white and still unremarkable. Jessica blinked. Hard. Her smirk vanished like a bad connection. She turned and walked away. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she'd never been spoken to like that. Not here. Not by someone she expected to kneel. 2 days later, Keisha was called to the principal's office. And every black kid knows that ain't never good. Didn't matter what you did. You could walk in with straight A's and a science trophy and still end up being told you were disruptive, or too loud, or too confident. Waiting in the office were 3 people, Principal Harris, Mr. Raynon, and her mother. The way her mom sat, upright, arms crossed, eyes sharp, Keisha knew something was coming. Mrs. Maxwell, Harris began, not meeting anyone's eyes. We're reviewing Keisha's place in the advanced literature program. It's a very rigorous curriculum, and there have been concerns. What concerns? Her mother asked, voice calm, but with an edge that could draw blood. Well, Harris cleared his throat. She's interruptive, challenges her teachers, shows signs of defiance. Or maybe, Mrs. Maxwell leaned in, you just don't like being challenged, especially by someone who makes your teachers uncomfortable. Raynon jumped in, playing the tired martyr. We give everyone a chance, but some students struggle to adjust. And frankly, there have been complaints from other parents. That was the moment Keisha knew. It was never about Shakespeare. It was about silence. They didn't want her smart. They wanted her quiet. Back in the car, her mother didn't say a word for a full minute. Then they messed with the wrong girl. That night, she filed a complaint, a real one, with the district office, pages long, with quotes, names, dates, details. Keisha stood by the window, looking at the streetlights flicker. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt like she had stepped onto a battlefield armed with a paperclip, but she was still standing, and sometimes that's the only kind of victory that matters. A week later, something shifted. Keisha was asked back to class, but this time, a woman was waiting. Black blazer, crisp white shirt, notepad in hand. "I'm Mrs. King," she said. "District oversight. I'll be observing." Rainin suddenly looked like someone had swapped his coffee with vinegar. He straightened his posture so fast his chair squeaked. Class began. He spoke with fake cheer, read too slow, explained too much. And when it came time for a student to read, his voice wavered. "Any volunteers?" Keisha stood. No fear, no theatrics. Her voice rang out like a sword drawn from a sheath. Clear, sharp, unapologetic. Mrs. King didn't blink once. Her pen didn't stop moving. Rainin didn't interrupt. Not once. Because for the first time, someone in power was listening. That night walking home, Keisha didn't say much. But in her mind, she said it clearly. "They're scared. Not of me. Of the truth I carry. They know now. I'm already here." This is the turning point. Everything you've waited for, it's happening now. Stay with it. Watch how Keisha makes the whole system listen. By Monday, Clarksfield High didn't feel like a school anymore. It felt like a play, a tired production where the actors forgot their lines, and the audience finally started realizing the whole thing was fake. Keisha walked through those doors like a name they tried to erase but couldn't quite scrub off the wall. Heads turned. Not with mockery, not even contempt, but tension. Nervous tension. Because when the system gets scratched, it doesn't heal. It retaliates. Mrs. King was still there. Every day now. No more subtle drop-ins or hallway glances. She planted herself in the back corner of the room with a notepad and the stillness of someone taking aim. And Mr. Rainin? The man looked like he hadn't slept since the district started breathing down his neck. His voice carried a shaky cheerfulness that fooled no one. His tone was tight, his compliments fake. "Great job, Jessica," he'd say when she stumbled through a line from Hamlet like it was a tongue twister. But when Keisha read, when the class went still, leaning in, drawn to her voice like it was pulling gravity, he'd nod stiffly. "A bit excessive, but you're trying. That's commendable." Commendable. Like patting a lion for managing not to roar. Then came the moment. "Keisha Maxwell?" The assistant principal's voice cut through the lunchroom, clear and formal. Keisha froze, tray in hand. "You're wanted in the auditorium." The what now? She walked through the hallway in silence. Her classmates whispered. Someone raised an eyebrow. But when she opened the auditorium doors, she saw the whole school, rows of students, teachers, parents, and on stage, a familiar figure in a gray blazer, Mrs. King, standing beside another official-looking person and a sign that read, "District Finalist Showcase, Expressive Reading Competition." Keisha blinked. "We heard about you," the woman beside Mrs. King said. She smiled. "We read the complaint your mother filed, and we heard your reading." She paused. "We'd like you to perform today." Rainin, sitting off to the side, looked like someone had poured cold milk down his spine. Keisha stepped onto the stage. Her old library copy of A Midsummer Night's Dream clutched in her hand like a shield, and a sword rolled into one. The pages were frayed. The cover was cracked. But the words? The words had never been sharper. She looked into the crowd. Her mother in the front row. Tommy seated nervously near the aisle. The students who used to laugh, and the ones who just watched. Then she spoke. "If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended. That you have but slumbered here, while these visions did appear." She didn't perform. She didn't act. She delivered. Her voice was calm thunder, her pacing exact. She wasn't begging for respect. She was dragging it into the room. Each word wrapped around the audience like a net. Every pause, every breath, felt like it belonged to someone who had been silenced and chose not to be quiet anymore. When she finished, the room erupted. No polite clapping, no good effort applause. People stood, one by one at first, then a wave, even teachers, even students who never looked her way. Rainin sat frozen, a man watching his control unravel under stage lights. 2 days later, the school board called a meeting. Rainin was summoned. The agenda, multiple complaints, bias in grading, dismissive language, classroom behavior unbecoming of an educator. And yes, the part about how the girl reading Shakespeare like fire and thunder somehow still only meets expectations. He gave his answers. I wasn't aware. We all have different styles. She's very passionate, but that wasn't going to cut it. Not when the district had already seen the proof. Not when parents, teachers, and community leaders were demanding answers. By the end of the week, Mr. Rainin was removed from his class. Administrative leave, they called it. But everybody knew, once the truth gets out, there's no putting it back in the box. And Keisha? She moved forward to the district competition, a real stage this time. She didn't just read Shakespeare. She brought Langston Hughes. She brought Toni Morrison. She brought the Harlem Renaissance with her like a second skin. She didn't just compete, she shook the room. She didn't win first, she won third. But that wasn't what mattered. When she walked back into school the next day, heads turned again. Not with smirks, not with whispers, with respect, with acknowledgement. Because she had done something most people never dream of. She made herself heard and stayed standing. A week later, another assembly was called. This time it wasn't a surprise. Keisha was invited to speak. Not perform, speak. She stepped up to the microphone, looked across the same sea of faces that had once doubted her, and said, I didn't come here to be liked. I didn't come here to make anyone comfortable. I came because words are power. And if you're scared I know how to read, then you should be terrified of what I'll write next. The room was silent. Not awkward, silent. Not waiting for the bell, silent. The kind of silent you get when people finally realize they're listening to something bigger than a student. They were listening to truth. Because when a black girl from the side of town they pretend doesn't exist takes a system meant to erase her and forces it to say her name, that's not a chapter in a school year. That's history. And for the first time, the silence wasn't avoidance. It was reverence. Silence was never my language. My voice is a blade. And now they know. I've always known how to use it.